First, I want to just address something that my colleague from Wisconsin said when he said that the Constitution lays out very clearly in Article 1 the powers of Congress.
The United States of America is a republic that is designed specifically, and our duties are articulated in the Constitution of the United States of America. So when we are speaking to the executive branch as a co-equal branch, we are not sending requests. A subpoena is not an ask, it's a task. And for the Attorney General of the United States to completely ignore the Congress is unlawful, and it cannot be tolerated. This should be the most bipartisan bill that would pass in this Congress, because my Democrat colleagues also have been emasculated by the Attorney General.
And I would just ask him or any of my colleagues on the other side, if you could point me to where in the Constitution it confers subpoena power on Congress. You won't be able to, because it is something established by the Supreme Court that is derivative from Congress's power to legislate. So the Supreme Court has set forth exactly what a congressional subpoena is authorized to do. In a recent case, you may remember it, the Trump versus Mazars case, because Donald Trump sued his accountant to prevent them from providing documents to Congress with a subpoena. Congressional authority. That's what we're worried about here.
I was quite concerned, Mr. Narasta, to hear you talk about over 3,000 Americans that have been murdered in the past decades, and you called that a small and manageable statistic. I would argue that every single one of those lives should never have been killed. And I know that you call yourself, self-described, radical advocate for open borders. That's on your Wikipedia page, but maybe Wikipedia is not always right.
I didn't say it.
However, I would self-describe myself as a radical advocate for safe and secure borders.
Well, I finally found something I agree with my colleague from Georgia. She is certainly radical.
This hearing is the third in the Oversight Committee's investigation into the federal government's response to the Chinese Communist Party's use of a strategy known as political warfare. The CCP employs this strategy to infiltrate and influence communities and critical sectors across the nation. The CCP's ultimate goal is to weaken and destroy its main enemy, which the party has identified as America.
My. Here we are for the third installment of the Defending America from the CCP's Political Warfare. After the chairman's impeachment investigation revealed zero connections between President Biden and Chinese businesses, he nonetheless shockingly views the nakedly partisan political sham impeachment as a success. Why? Because President Biden dropped out of the presidential race. Now, that is a blatant admission that this committee was used improperly for partisan purposes.
Each day, the failed policies of this administration become more glaring. And those who implemented the disastrous agenda leading to the current crisis at our border must absolutely be held accountable. As border czar, Vice President Harris has overseen the most catastrophic border crisis in our nation's history. As we all know, the failed policies of the Biden-Harris administration have turned every state in the United States into a border state and led to a record level of illegal immigration, including from individuals on the terrorist watch list. We cannot stand by and allow this to happen. These failed policies are a direct assault on the sovereignty, the security, and the strength of the United States.
I rise today to address the Republicans' desperate attempt to, yet again, use the official business of the House of Representatives to do the partisan political bidding of Donald Trump. The title of this resolution is, quote, strongly condemning the Biden administration and its border czar, Kamala Harris's failure to secure the United States border. There's one problem. There's no such thing as a border czar, nor was Vice President Harris ever named the border czar. The entire premise of this resolution is simply false.
Walls are not racist. Walls keep people safe. And this country is not safe. People are being murdered every day. The woman you're sitting next to's daughter was raped and brutally murdered. That's not funny. Walls are not racist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a lot to get through because we've got about 4 years to walk through. That chart, of course, mischaracterizes when Mr. Trump left office. But there's no question that the problems at our border have significantly increased over the last several years. We can debate the cause of that, and we have debated the cause of that. There's unquestionably a lot more climate migration. There's unquestionably a lot more authoritarianism in Central and South America that is leading to political persecution and to people wanting to flee. But there's a problem. And what happened is the administration began to address that problem as it was increasing. But Republican attorneys general all around the country filed lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit to stop administrative action. So in response to that, the Biden-Harris administration went to Congress to say, let's work on bipartisan legislation to try to solve our border crisis. And Senator Lankford, the second most conservative Republican in the Senate, negotiated for months with an independent and a Democrat and with the administration to come to some sort of bipartisan resolution, which they did miraculously because this has notoriously been a very difficult issue. Now, that deal was the most conservative border security immigration bill that's ever been agreed to by any Democratic administration. It had a number of different provisions, but I think most importantly, would have dramatically streamlined the asylum process. And let me just say something about the asylum process, because there's a lot of talk about legal immigration and illegal immigration. Asylum is legal immigration. It is not illegal immigration. It is part of our laws that you may seek asylum under certain circumstances. The problem we have at the border and the problem we have with our asylum process is that only 20 to 25% of people who apply for asylum ultimately get asylum. But it takes 7 to 10 years for that process to play out. This border security bill would have dramatically shortened the asylum process such that it would be over in 6 months. And the incentive for someone who knows that they do not qualify for asylum to come across the border would be eliminated. And many of those 75 to 80% of people who are not eligible for asylum would not come here and would not be granted work permits. The other thing it does is it would increase visas because we do have a work shortage. We have a job shortage for agriculture, for construction, for restaurant workers, hotel workers, home care, nurses, doctors, scientists. This is all what I hear in my district. We need to increase those quotas. That bill would have done it. We need, as Mr. Heike said, to increase personnel at the border to deal with the problems so that we can address the women who are being raped, so we can address the cartels that are fueled by American-made guns. We need more personnel. We need more resources. This bill would have done it. But what happened? Donald Trump killed the deal. He's open about it. And you know why he killed the deal that would have dramatically solved our problems at the border? Because he cares more about his own election than he does about the problems facing the American people. And he wanted chaos at the border so that he could run on it. And when you watch him at the debate, he answers every single question. It doesn't matter what the topic is by going back to immigration. That's what he wants to do. I want to put up, finally, this last quote here from James Lankford, who was the author of this bill and was understandably very frustrated that it did not pass. It is very, very clear that the Republicans do not want to solve the problem at the border. And so what has happened since Donald Trump killed this bill that would have dramatically addressed the solutions at the border? President Biden and Vice President Harris have had no choice but to implement executive actions to streamline this process so that people coming in have to come in through ports of entry, so that those 73,000 people who are stopped at the border, they're not getting in, they're stopped at the border, have to go through the points of entry so that we can vet them and check them for their criminal history. And that has reduced border crossings to a level not seen since 2019. More than 55%. But that's not the solution. The solution is legislation, and the Republicans will not meet in the middle. I yield back. Now that Governor Tim Walz is on the ticket, Chairman Comer has quickly pivoted to focus this committee's resource on Governor Walz's time teaching English in China, insinuating that somehow that is a problem. What we really need to be focusing on, as it relates to CCP's political warfare, is defending this committee from that political warfare. Remember, we have two witnesses who were the star witnesses of the impeachment investigation. The first, Gal Luft, turned out to be an indicted, unregistered foreign agent of the Chinese government. Among the allegations in Gal Luft's indictment was that he, at the behest of Chinese entities, recruited and paid an unnamed advisor to then President-elect Donald Trump to adopt pro-Chinese positions. And even though he also was charged with making false statements to the FBI, Chairman Comer bragged and said Gal Luft is a very credible witness on Biden family corruption. That wasn't all the political warfare that we experienced during this impeachment investigation. Alexander Smirnov is a Russian indicted as a source for the FBI who literally met with Russian officials to peddle lies to the FBI. You know what those lies were? They were the same allegations that the chairman made against Joe Biden in this committee: Russian propaganda. Now, this is not, unfortunately, the chairman's only connections to China. Just months after our last hearing on the CCP political influence, a news report alleged that while he was the agricultural commissioner and candidate for governor of Kentucky, the chairman was involved in a failed Chinese hemp deal that would have benefited a campaign donor's company. This deal not only failed, but it turned out that Chairman Comer accidentally imported illegal marijuana instead of legal hemp. So maybe we should be investigating Chairman Comer's ties to the CCP.
Instead of complying with the lawfully issued congressional subpoenas, Attorney General Garland refused to hand over unredacted audio recordings and materials. This is why House Republicans voted to hold Garland in criminal contempt of Congress. However, on June 14, 2024, the Department of Justice informed us that they would not uphold the law and prosecute the Attorney General for contempt of Congress. While we all expect the DOJ's response, the dangerous precedent it set cannot be overstated. In order for the House of Representatives to do its job, we must have access to the information that will allow us to make informed decisions on behalf of our constituents. With Attorney General Garland and the Department of Justice refusing to follow the law, we have been left with no choice but to rely on inherent contempt, our constitutional authority to hold an individual accountable for refusing to comply with congressional demands.
We don't try cases. There's no trial here. There's no demeanor evidence. As much as you may want to prosecute Joe Biden, there is no congressional prosecution of Joe Biden, and his demeanor evidence is no legitimate basis for this subpoena. Now, you of course know and I don't even think you'd argue that there's a legitimate legislative purpose to use the audio recordings in a political ad to support your dear leader, Mr. Trump. So that clearly falls outside of the range. Of course, my friends on the other side of the aisle should refocus from demeanor evidence to basic concepts like due process or executive privilege. Because the President of the United States asserted executive privilege over this audio tape. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, but you have no authority to determine that that is not a correct assertion of the executive privilege. And you know who else doesn't have authority to determine that? The Attorney General, who you are trying to hold in contempt. Due process. You're going to fine someone $10,000 without notice or an opportunity to be heard? You're going to say, we're going to fine you because, and you have no opportunity to make a defense, and there is no neutral adjudicator? You can go to court all you want, and that's where you went, and that's where you belong. And that's why this resolution is such bogus. But I have a warning for you, my friends. You will reap what you sow. In June of 2019, then President Donald Trump said he would, quote, defy all congressional subpoenas. And that is exactly what he did. During the first impeachment investigation, every single executive branch agency defied a lawful subpoena from Congress.
Gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair.
I yield the gentleman an additional 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
The State Department was subpoenaed, the Defense Department, not a single document. So I look forward to whoever one day is the Republican Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense to be held in contempt and fined, inherent contempt and fined $10,000.
Illegal immigrants have had free run to abuse our system. Drugs like fentanyl have poured into our communities across our entire country. And individuals with ties to terrorism and to known adversaries of our great republic have been turned loose inside the United States, including a record-level number of Chinese communist nationals. And because of that, Americans are suffering, and we are in danger. Despite this, Kamala Harris has visited our southern border just once since becoming border czar, and for that reason, this resolution is important to hold her accountable for her role in this mess. This resolution is an important part of that accountability, and as such, I urge its passage and urge all colleagues to lend its support.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have spent most of this Congress wasting our time and taxpayer money on a bogus sham impeachment investigation of President Biden that yielded no evidence of wrongdoing, much less any high crime or misdemeanor. It was obvious that that phony effort was solely designed to provide election fodder for Trump in advance of November's election. And recently, the chairman of the committee overseeing that investigation even admitted as much. And now that President Biden has selflessly and patriotically passed the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are scrambling to help Donald Trump's electoral chances by using our time here today on a blatantly false resolution about Vice President Harris. Not surprisingly, the resolution makes no mention of the border security bill that the Biden-Harris administration negotiated with Senate Republicans that would have comprehensively addressed the problems at the border. Nor does it say anything about Donald Trump's decision to sabotage and kill that bipartisan bill because it would have solved the problems that this resolution complains about. Now, why'd he do that? Precisely because he wanted his minions in the House to introduce useless and deceptive resolutions like this one to help his campaign. I want to focus on the subject of terrorism that is of this hearing. For this fiscal year to date, CBP reports encountering 96 watch-listed individuals between the southern border ports of entry. Let's put that in perspective. That is 0.007% of all Border Patrol encounters in fiscal year 2024. And we know that being on the watch list is not equivalent to being a known terrorist. There are many ways you get on that watch list, and it is certainly not determinative. But there is no question that there is a problem at the border. Our system cannot withstand the number of people who are trying to get into this country. And I would completely agree with you, Mr. Narasta. Part of that is because the quotas for lawful visas have not been increased in 25 to 30 years, even though, of course, our population has dramatically increased, our economy has dramatically grown. We need people to fill jobs in this country up and down the spectrum. I want to also just focus on a couple of things. Mr. Healy, I'll ask you, do you think that it would be helpful to address our problems at the border if the Department of Justice received $440 million to hire additional immigration judge teams?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if CBP received $3.8 billion to fund operational costs to manage and enhance security at our nation's borders?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if CBP received $723 million to hire additional officers and Border Patrol agents?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if DHS received $424 million to combat the entry of fentanyl and other illegal narcotics from entering the United States?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if the Immigration and Customs Enforcement received $2.55 billion to fund transportation costs, including increased flights and staging facilities?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if ICE received $1.29 billion to fund an expansion of the Alternatives to Detention program, which would allow for immediate enrollment at the southwest border to fulfill non-mandatory detention mandates while keeping track of those who come in?
I'm not sure of that
Okay.
directive.
What about $4 billion for U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services for personnel, facilities, and related costs to meet new operational requirements, including adding 4,338 asylum officers?
I'm not familiar with that either.
Well, you are aware, of course, that asylum applications take up to 10 years to get through. Is that right?
Yes.
So you don't think that adding more than 4,000 asylum officers would help streamline that process and stop the incentive for people to try to get asylum here?
I'm with CBP. I understand the support they have, but the reality is that if we close the borders, we have even President Biden issued an executive order that stopped the
Right.
flow.
So all those things I just asked you about were in the bipartisan border security bill that the Senate had agreed to in a bipartisan way, the administration had supported. And do you know who killed that bill?
No, I don't, but the frustration for the
Okay, I'll
folks,
tell you who killed that bill. Donald Trump killed that bill. And he was open about it. And he said he killed it because he didn't want to solve the problems at the border, that all of those things you just agreed would help do so, because he wanted to use it as a political weapon in his campaign. So when we are talking about immigration reform, we can all agree that it can not only be done by executive order. President Biden had no choice but to implement an executive order that forced people to come through ports of entry if they sought asylum, which has dramatically lowered by more than 50% the border crossings and encounters since he implemented it in June. But that is not a solution. The solution is legislation. And there was legislation that the Republicans killed. So please do not lecture me about all of our problems at the border when it is the Republican Party and Donald Trump who are the ones who refuse to solve the problem. And I yield back.